Daniel Harris pushed open the front door of his modest home in Pine Hills, North Carolina, and the sound that greeted him was silence, deep, unbroken, and heavy. He stood in the doorway for a moment, staring at the dim light filtering through the curtains, feeling the weight of absence pressing against his chest. The creak of the floorboards under his boots reminded him of patrols overseas, though now there was no squad following, no dog trotting faithfully at his side, no mission to prepare for. Just him, a man in his mid-30s, carrying memories he couldn't quite set down. The living room was tidy, almost too tidy. He had developed a habit of cleaning in the evenings, as if scrubbing the counter or vacuuming the carpet might erase the restless energy that surged inside him. On the coffee table lay a folded American flag given to him after his service. Next to it, an old photo. Daniel in desert fatigues kneeling beside a powerful German shepherd with intelligent eyes. Rex. The dog that had been his partner, his lifeline. The report had been brief, MIA after blast, presumed lost. But the emptiness that followed lasted years. He set his keys on the counter and lowered himself onto the couch, elbows on his knees, palms covering his face. He had made it home alive, but sometimes he questioned what home even meant. The walls felt too close, the air too still. Nights were worse, when memories crawled in and the silence became unbearable. Daniel shook his head as if trying to physically scatter the thoughts. He needed distraction. Tomorrow meant another shift at the hardware store, where he stocked shelves and helped customers find screws or nails. It was honest work, but it didn't fill the hollow space inside him. People said he was lucky, that he had survived when so many hadn't. But luck felt like the wrong word when each day felt like dragging a weight chained to his chest. As he stared at Rex's photo, he remembered nights on deployment when that dog had pressed close against him, steadying his heartbeat. Rex had been fearless in the field, but more than that, he had been family. Daniel swallowed hard and forced himself to look away. He couldn't live in the past forever, or at least that's what he told himself. But deep down, he knew he was trapped between two worlds, the one where he had a loyal partner by his side, and the one where he sat alone on this couch, wondering if the silence would ever loosen its grip. If you've ever wondered how a man rebuilds his life when every piece of it feels broken, then stay with me, because what happens next will take this story to a place you won't expect. And before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, so you never miss stories like this. Stories that remind us of resilience, of loyalty, and of the hope waiting just beyond despair. Daniel stood pacing the room, running a hand over his short-cropped hair. He thought of the neighbors, families grilling in their backyards, kids tossing footballs on the street, couples laughing at the diner downtown. He was grateful for them, but he didn't know how to step into that rhythm again. He was an observer, not a participant, caught behind glass. The clock ticked steadily. He sighed, pulled on a worn jacket, and stepped out onto the porch. The evening air was cool, filled with the smell of pine and cut grass. Somewhere a dog barked, sharp and distant. Daniel froze, his pulse quickening. The sound carried memories he couldn't stop, memories that felt so close he could almost see them unfolding on the street in front of him. But when the barking faded, reality returned. Just silence again. Just him. And yet something stirred in him, a small ember he hadn't felt in a long time. He didn't know it yet, but the path he was on would lead him to a moment so unbelievable. It would shake the very silence that had haunted his life for years. The next morning, Daniel pulled into the parking lot of Pine Hills Hardware, his old pickup rattling as it settled into a space. The store was a squat brick building at the edge of town, its wide glass doors reflecting the rising sun. He grabbed his cap, tugged it low and stepped out, breathing in the sharp scent of lumber stacked nearby. This was his routine now, predictable, steady, and just enough to keep him moving. Inside, the aisles smelled of sawdust and motor oil. Customers trickled in, mostly locals looking for paint, nails, or tools to fix up their homes. Daniel nodded at familiar faces, offering help when asked, but he rarely lingered in conversation. His co-workers respected him, but they didn't really know him. He kept it that way. "Morning, Dan," called Pete, the manager, a stout man with a friendly grin. "Morning," Daniel replied, adjusting his gloves as he pushed a cart of supplies. He carried out his tasks methodically, stocking shelves, cutting lumber for customers, answering the occasional question about drill bits or screws. On the surface, he looked like any other hard-working man. But beneath it all, he felt the pressure of a life that didn't quite fit. The rhythm of the store couldn't drown out the echoes of another world, the cadence of boots, the clipped commands, the sound of a dog's bark in the middle of chaos. At lunch, he sat outside on a bench behind the store, unwrapping a simple sandwich. The sun warmed his shoulders, and he watched cars pass along Main Street. Families laughed inside the diner across the way, and teenagers pedaled by on bikes. It should have been comforting, this picture of small-town America. Instead, it felt distant, like a photograph he wasn't part of. The sound of a screen door slamming pulled his attention. Mary Collins, owner of Collins Diner, walked across the lot with a basket covered by a cloth. She was in her late 50s, silver hair tied back neatly, her smile warm but firm. "Daniel Harris," she called, her voice carrying a mixture of affection and authority. "You planning to survive on peanut butter sandwiches forever?" He managed a faint smile. "They do the job." Mary set the basket down beside him and lifted the cloth, revealing warm biscuits and fried chicken wrapped in foil. "Well, this will do the job better. Eat." Daniel hesitated, then gave in, taking a biscuit. "Thanks, Mary, you didn't have to." "I know," she said, settling onto the bench. "But I wanted to. You look like you could use something hearty. Been keeping to yourself too much." He chewed slowly, the taste pulling him back to Sunday dinners from long ago. He cleared his throat. "I'm fine, really. Just keeping busy." Mary studied him, her gaze steady. "Busy doesn't always mean living, Daniel. You need people around you. You need a reason to laugh again." Her words sat heavy in the air. He had no easy response, so he focused on the food. She didn't push further, just gave his shoulder a gentle pat before rising. "You know where to find me if you get tired of silence," she said, leaving him with the basket. As she walked away, Daniel felt a flicker of warmth, small, fragile, but real. Mary had been there since he returned, checking in without smothering him. Her kindness reminded him that not everyone expected him to simply snap back into place. When his shift ended, Daniel drove home along winding roads lined with pine trees. The sky glowed orange as the sun dipped lower, shadows stretching across fields. He thought about Mary's words, about how easy it was to confuse survival with living. The silence that waited for him at home felt heavier because of it. He parked, sat in the truck for a long moment, and stared at the empty driveway. The weight of civilian life pressed against him from all sides. Quiet streets, routine tasks, familiar faces that felt unfamiliar to him. He wondered how much longer he could keep carrying it alone. And though he didn't know it yet, change was already waiting around the corner, in a place he never thought he'd set foot in. Daniel woke before dawn, restless again. The night had been broken by the same dream: dust, fire, and the thunder of explosions. He sat on the edge of his bed, rubbing his face with both hands. The world outside was still dark, cicadas buzzing faintly in the trees, but his mind was wide awake, caught in places far from Pine Hills. He reached for the photograph on his nightstand, the one of him crouched beside Rex. The dog's ears were sharp, his tongue hanging slightly as if smiling even in uniform discipline. Daniel stared at it until the edges blurred. Memories pulled him backward, and he let them. Afghanistan. The air had been hot and dry, stinging with sand. Their patrol moved cautiously through narrow streets of a village, walls crumbling with age. Daniel remembered the tension in the air, the way every step carried weight. Rex was beside him, alert, nose to the ground, tail stiff. That dog had sensed things no human could. "Easy, boy," Daniel had whispered then, his hand brushing Rex's back. Suddenly, Rex had stopped, ears pricked, muscles tense. Within moments, the dog signaled the presence of explosives hidden near a roadside wall. The squad froze. Daniel's heart had pounded as the team disarmed the device. They all owed their lives to Rex that day. The memory shifted again. A different night, The desert sky stretched endlessly overhead, stars scattered brighter than he'd ever seen back home. Daniel had been lying in the dirt, too tired to speak when Rex curled against him, pressing warmth into his side. The simple weight of the dog's presence had been enough to chase away despair. Back in his kitchen now, Daniel poured black coffee, staring out the window at the pale glow of morning. His chest tightened. The images of Rex weren't just memories, they were anchors, reminders of something he'd lost but couldn't let go of. At the hardware store later, his mind drifted. A customer asked about measuring tape, but Daniel's answer was slow, distracted. He caught himself and forced a polite smile. He knew people noticed sometimes. They just didn't ask. That evening, Mary spotted him at the diner counter, staring into a cup of coffee gone cold. She slid a slice of pecan pie in front of him without a word, sitting across from him. "You've got that look again," she said softly. He sighed. "What look?" "The one where you're somewhere else entirely. I've seen it on plenty of faces." Daniel tapped the fork against the plate. "It's hard to turn it off. Some nights it feels like I never left." Mary nodded, her expression steady but full of empathy. "I can't pretend to know what you went through. But I do know you don't have to carry it by yourself." He didn't answer right away. The pie smelled sweet, rich, but he barely tasted it. His thoughts were already pulling him back. Dusty streets, the sound of boots, Rex's bark echoing against stone walls. Later, at home, Daniel sat on the porch as the evening settled. Fireflies flickered across the yard, and the air smelled of pine sap and cut grass. He closed his eyes, and there it was again. The memory of the blast, deafening, ground shaking beneath him. The dust, the chaos, the frantic shouts. And then, nothing. Rex was gone. He clenched his fists against the ache in his chest. Everyone told him time healed, but years later the wound felt fresh, as if only days had passed. He whispered into the quiet night, "Where are you, boy?" The question carried into the dark, unanswered. Yet Daniel felt the weight of it settle deep inside him, heavier than ever. Something had to change, though he couldn't yet see what that change would be. The next Saturday morning found Daniel at the diner again, the smell of bacon and coffee filling the air. Mary moved between tables with the ease of someone who had spent a lifetime tending to people's needs. When she stopped by his booth, she carried 2 mugs of fresh coffee and slid one in front of him before sitting down. "You look like a man who's still fighting battles no one else can see," she said, not unkindly. Daniel gave a short laugh, though there was no humor in it. "You've got a sharp eye." "I've seen it before," Mary replied, folding her hands on the table. "My husband came back from Vietnam. He never talked much about it, but I could see the same storm in him. He found a way through, though." Daniel sipped his coffee. "How?" Mary leaned back, studying him. "By finding something that needed him, something that gave him a reason to get out of bed every morning. Daniel, have you ever thought about volunteering at the animal shelter?" The words caught him off guard. He nearly choked on his coffee. "The shelter?" "Yes, Pine Hills Animal Rescue. Laura Bennett runs it. You might know her. They're always looking for help. Dogs, cats, all kinds of strays end up there." Daniel set his mug down, shaking his head. "I don't think that's for me." "Why not?" His throat tightened, and he avoided her gaze. "Dogs, they bring back too much. I wouldn't handle it well." Mary's expression softened. "Maybe that's exactly why you should go." "You're carrying a lot of weight, Daniel. Helping an animal heal might help you heal too." The thought sat heavily with him the rest of the day. He tried to brush it off, diving into chores around the house, fixing a squeaky hinge, mowing the lawn, reorganizing tools in the shed. But every task ended the same way. His mind circling back to Mary's words. That night, he sat on the couch, the house too quiet once again. His eyes drifted to the folded flag and the photograph of Rex. The idea of stepping into a shelter filled with barking, restless dogs sent a surge of dread through him. Yet underneath the dread was something else, a flicker of longing he didn't want to name. He muttered aloud as if arguing with himself. "That's just a place full of strays. Nothing good can come from that." But even as he said it, he remembered the steady weight of Rex pressed against him during long desert nights, the way those eyes had spoken of loyalty beyond words. The silence of the house clawed at him until he stood abruptly pacing the room. The next day at the hardware store, he found himself distracted again. Pete noticed. "You all right, Dan? You've been somewhere else all morning." "I'm fine," Daniel said quickly, stacking boxes with more force than necessary. But inside, he knew he wasn't. When his shift ended, he didn't drive straight home. Instead, he parked outside the diner, the neon sign flickering in the dusk. Mary was closing up, locking the front door. She spotted him leaning against his truck. "You're still thinking about it, aren't you?" she asked. He exhaled slowly. "Yeah, I don't know if I can do it." Mary gave him a small, knowing smile. "That's exactly why you should. Sometimes the things we resist most are the things that set us free." Daniel looked past her toward the quiet street, where street lamps hummed and the scent of magnolia drifted through the evening air. He didn't give her an answer, but something inside him shifted, however slightly. Later that night, lying awake in bed, he whispered into the dark, "Maybe." The single word lingered, fragile but real, marking the beginning of a decision he didn't yet understand. Daniel parked outside Pine Hills Animal Rescue a week later, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. The building was modest, a squat structure with a chain-link fence around the back. From where he sat, he could already hear the chorus of barks and whines. His chest tightened. He almost put the truck back in gear to leave, but Mary's voice echoed in his head. "Sometimes the things we resist most are the things that set us free." He forced himself out, walked across the gravel lot and opened the door. The smell hit him first, disinfectant mixed with the musky tang of animals. A bell jingled overhead, and a woman looked up from the front desk. She was in her early 40s, auburn hair tied back, her eyes steady but kind. "You must be Daniel," she said, rising to greet him. Mary called ahead. "I'm Laura Bennett." He nodded, shaking her hand. "Yeah, I figured I'd give this a try." Laura smiled. "That's all we ask. Come on, I'll show you around." She led him through the shelter, rows of kennels, cats in play enclosures, bulletin boards plastered with adoption flyers. The barking was constant, a chaotic wall of sound. Daniel's shoulders tensed, but he kept moving. Laura glanced at him. "We usually start new volunteers with the basics. Cleaning kennels, carrying supplies, small repairs. Nothing too overwhelming." "That's fine," Daniel replied quickly. "I'd rather keep my hands busy." His first tasks were simple, but physical. Scrubbing down kennel floors, hauling bags of food, fixing a loose gate latch. The work was sweaty and repetitive, but it grounded him. Each clang of a bucket, each sweep of a mop kept his mind focused on the present, not the past. As he worked, he watched the animals from the corner of his eye. Some dogs pressed against the bars, tails wagging hopefully. Others cowered in corners, eyes wary. He recognized something in them, the look of creatures who had seen too much and trusted too little. At one kennel, a tan mutt barked excitedly, until Daniel crouched down. The dog's tail wagged furiously, tongue lolling, desperate for attention. Daniel reached through the bars, hesitated, then scratched behind its ear. The dog leaned into his hand with a sigh. Laura noticed. "You've got a calm presence, they pick up on that." Daniel shook his head. "I don't know about calm. More like empty." "Sometimes that's exactly what they need," she said gently. The afternoon stretched on. He repaired a section of fencing outside, the smell of fresh-cut grass and the warmth of the sun wrapping around him. For the first time in a long while, he felt the day pass without drowning in memories. Exhaustion crept into his muscles, but it was a good kind, the kind earned by work, not by restless nights. When his shift ended, Laura handed him a clipboard to sign out. "You did well today. Think you'll come back?" Daniel hesitated, glancing toward the kennels where dozens of eyes still watched him. Some hopeful, some broken. He swallowed. "Yeah, I think I will." Driving home, he realized the silence in the truck felt different, not gone but softer somehow. The barking that had once tensed his chest now lingered in his ears like an echo of something alive, something stubbornly present. That night he sat on the porch with a beer, staring at the stars. He thought of the dogs, of the way they pushed through fear, waiting for a second chance. He wondered if he was waiting for the same thing, even if he didn't know what it looked like yet. What he didn't know was that the second chance he couldn't imagine was already waiting for him inside that shelter, behind a set of bars he hadn't yet approached. 2 weeks into volunteering, Daniel had begun to find a rhythm at the shelter. He arrived early, fixed things that needed fixing, and kept mostly to himself. The barking no longer overwhelmed him the way it once had. It was still loud, still chaotic, but there was a strange comfort in its constancy. He started recognizing the dogs, knew which ones begged for attention, which ones snapped out of fear, and which ones waited quietly, as if hoping not to be noticed. That afternoon, Laura waved him over as a truck pulled into the gravel lot. "New intake," she explained. "Stray found outside town. Looks like he's been through a lot." Daniel helped unload supplies from the truck, but his attention was caught by the figure in the crate at the back, a German shepherd, lean but strong, pressed against the corner of the cage. His coat was patchy, scars visible along his flank and muzzle. One ear was notched, his eyes sharp but clouded with mistrust. As the handlers lifted the crate down, the dog growled low, teeth flashing briefly. The sound pierced Daniel like a memory. He froze in place, pulse hammering, because in that brief instant he thought he knew that growl. Laura noticed his expression. "You okay?" "Yeah," Daniel muttered, though his throat felt tight. Just, he looks familiar." The dog was placed in a kennel away from the others. He paced restlessly, hackles raised, gaze darting to every movement around him. Unlike the other dogs, he didn't bark. He watched, measured, waited. Daniel found himself standing outside the bars, unable to move away. His chest ached. The slope of the dog's back, the set of his jaw, even the scars. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle he couldn't quite assemble. He whispered under his breath, "No, it can't be." The shepherd stopped pacing, his eyes locked on Daniel, unblinking, intense. The shelter noise around them seemed to fade for a moment. Something passed between them, something Daniel hadn't felt in years, a spark of recognition so sharp it almost hurt. He crouched slowly, keeping his voice steady. "Easy, boy. I'm not here to hurt you." The dog didn't lunge, didn't growl again. He stood still, tail stiff, ears tilted slightly forward. For the first time since arriving, he wasn't moving in frantic distrust. He was focused entirely on Daniel. Laura stepped closer. "Careful with him. He's aggressive, probably abused." Daniel didn't look away from the shepherd. "He's not aggressive. He's guarded." The dog gave a small whine, barely audible but enough to make Daniel's heart stutter. His mind reeled with memories, Rex pulling him from danger, Rex pressing against him under desert stars, Rex disappearing in the haze of an explosion. He shook his head hard, standing quickly as if distance could break the illusion. "No," he whispered to himself. "It's impossible." But as he walked away, he could feel the shepherd's eyes still on him, burning with a familiarity that rattled him to his core. That night, Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The scars, the notched ear, the way the dog had frozen instead of attacking, it all lined up too closely. He argued with himself endlessly. Dogs don't just reappear after years. It couldn't be Rex. It couldn't. And yet deep inside a voice refused to be silenced. What if it is? The uncertainty gnawed at him, stirring something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Dangerous, reckless hope. Daniel arrived at the shelter early the next morning, telling himself he was just there to help with repairs. But as soon as he stepped through the door, his eyes betrayed him, scanning the kennels until they found the shepherd. The dog was lying down, head on his paws, but the moment Daniel appeared, those sharp eyes lifted, following him with unwavering intensity. Laura was at the desk, flipping through paperwork. She noticed where Daniel's gaze had landed. "He gave the night staff a hard time," she said. "Won't let anyone near him. He refuses food unless it's left inside and they back away." Daniel frowned. "What's his background?" "Stray, found wandering outside an abandoned property off Highway 74. Malnourished, scarred, no tags, no microchip. We'll put him on a stray hold for a week, then open for adoption if no one claims him." The words barely registered. Daniel was already thinking about the scars, the notched ear, the way the dog had frozen instead of fighting. He felt the photo of Rex in his wallet, like it was burning through the leather. Later, while scrubbing down empty kennels, he couldn't stop himself from muttering, "It can't be, there's no way." But the image of those eyes wouldn't let him rest. By afternoon, he found himself standing in front of the shepherd's kennel again. The dog stood immediately, tail rigid, ears tilted forward. The air between them seemed electric, charged with recognition. Daniel crouched low, speaking softly. "Rex, that you, boy?" The name hung in the air like a challenge. The shepherd didn't move, but his ears flicked at the sound. Daniel's throat tightened. He tried again, his voice firmer. "Rex, sit." For a long, breathless moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the dog lowered his haunches to the ground. Not perfect, not immediate, but deliberate. Obedience born of training, not chance. Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs. "No, it can't be." His vision blurred as he whispered, "But it is." The dog gave a low, uncertain whine, as if echoing the same confusion. Laura approached cautiously. "What did you just do?" Daniel swallowed hard. "That's not just any dog." "I think he's mine," her brow furrowed. "Yours? Daniel, this dog came in as a stray. We don't know where he's from." "He knows commands," Daniel insisted, standing now, his voice shaking. "Not basic ones, specific ones. I trained him myself. His name is Rex. He was my canine partner overseas." Laura crossed her arms, skeptical. "You realize how unlikely that sounds, right?" "Do you know how many German shepherds we see here?" Daniel stepped closer to the bars, eyes locked with the dog's. "Look at him. Look at the scars, the way he watches. That's not a random stray. That's Rex. I know it." The shepherd whined again, pressing his nose briefly against the bars, before retreating to the back of the kennel. Laura shook her head gently. "I'm not saying it's impossible, but you'll need more than a hunch. Until then, he's just another stray under our care." Daniel clenched his fists, the weight of both disbelief and hope colliding inside him. The odds were staggering, but the spark of recognition was undeniable. He had spent years convinced Rex was gone, and now for the first time he felt that belief shatter. Driving home that evening, his hands trembled on the steering wheel. He replayed the moment again and again, the way Rex's ears flicked at his name, the slow, deliberate sit. He couldn't dismiss it. He wouldn't. For the first time in years, Daniel felt something stir deep inside him, something that felt dangerously close to faith. If this truly was Rex, then everything he thought he had lost forever might just be within reach again. Daniel couldn't shake the image of the shepherd obeying that command. By the time he returned to the shelter the next morning, his chest carried a mix of dread and anticipation. He walked past the rows of kennels until he reached the far corner, where the dog lay curled in the shadows. The shepherd lifted his head immediately. His eyes locked on Daniel's, sharp and unblinking. The recognition in that gaze cut through Daniel like a blade. He crouched, his voice low but steady. "Rex. Front." The dog rose slowly, hesitated, then padded forward until his nose pressed against the bars. His posture wasn't defiant. It was deliberate. A choice. Daniel's breath hitched. His voice shook as he whispered, "Good boy, that's my good boy." Laura, who had been observing from a distance, crossed her arms. Coincidence. Plenty of shepherds know those commands. Daniel turned, intensity in his voice. "Not this one. Watch." He faced the dog again. "Rex, down." The shepherd hesitated, eyes flicking to Daniel's hand as if searching for confirmation. Daniel repeated softly, "Down." The dog lowered himself to the ground, chest pressed flat, head up, exactly as he had been trained years ago. Daniel's throat tightened. He dropped his voice, using the phrase he had used countless nights in the desert. "Stay close," the shepherd whimpered, then pressed his body against the bars, trembling. Emotion surged through Daniel so fiercely he had to grip the kennel door for balance. Tears blurred his vision. "It's you. God, it's really you." Laura's skeptical expression faltered. That's not standard obedience, is it? No, Daniel said, his voice breaking. That's our command, our bond. He crouched again, his hand sliding through the bars. The shepherd sniffed, then pressed his scarred muzzle into Daniel's palm. The contact was tentative, but it shattered the wall between them. For a moment, the world fell away. No barking, no walls, no years lost. Just two soldiers finding each other again. Daniel whispered, "I thought you were gone. I thought I lost you forever." The dog gave a sharp exhale, a sound halfway between a sigh and a whine. His body trembled, but he didn't pull away. Laura watched in stunned silence. Finally, she said, "Daniel, if this really is your dog, you need proof. Without it, he's just another stray in our records." "I'll find it," Daniel said firmly. "I'll prove it." He stayed by the kennel for nearly an hour, murmuring familiar phrases, watching Rex respond with hesitant obedience that grew steadier each time. Every command answered was another piece of confirmation, another fragment of a bond reforged. When Laura finally urged him to leave, Rex pressed against the bars, whining softly as Daniel stood. The sound clawed at Daniel's chest, but he forced himself to walk away, whispering over his shoulder, "I'll be back. I promise." That night, sitting at his kitchen table, Daniel pulled out his old service box. Inside were faded photographs, deployment logs, scraps of notes. He searched desperately for anything that could prove Rex's identity. Each photo of them together hit him with a wave of memory. Patrols under blazing sun, nights under foreign skies, missions where life and death had hinged on Rex's instincts. He set one photo aside, Rex's profile clear against the desert sand, the notch in his ear already visible. Proof existed. He just had to gather it, to convince others of what his heart already knew. Daniel leaned back, exhausted but alive in a way he hadn't been in years. He finally had something to fight for again. And this time, he wasn't about to lose. The following Monday, Daniel walked into the shelter with a determination that bordered on desperation. He had spent the weekend digging through boxes, piecing together fragments of his service records, and every shred of evidence pointed to what his heart already knew. This was Rex. Laura met him at the front desk, her arms full of paperwork. She gave him a cautious smile. "He's calmer when you're around," the staff noticed. "But Daniel, we can't just hand him over." "I'm not asking you to bend rules," Daniel said, voice firm. "I just want the process to move forward. He's not a stray. He's a veteran. He's mine." Laura set the papers down, exhaling slowly. "I believe you believe that, but until we have proof, my hands are tied. Legally, every dog that comes through here is property of the county for a mandatory hold period. After that, he can be adopted, but only if there are no competing claims." The words hit him like a punch. Competing claims? What does that mean? It means if someone else comes forward wanting him, or if there's any record tying him to another owner, we have to consider it. And since he came in with no tags, no chip, nothing, it's complicated. Daniel leaned against the counter, frustration boiling in his chest. Complicated? "Laura, that dog saved my life more times than I can count. He's not just some random shepherd. He's Rex. I can prove it if the army still has his file." Laura's gaze softened. "Then that's what you need to do. Track down his records. Get a microchip scan, something official. Without that, I can't stop the adoption process from running its course." Daniel clenched his jaw, fighting the urge to slam his fist against the desk. Years of discipline kept him in check, but inside, fear gnawed at him. The thought of losing Rex again, this time not to war but to red tape, was unbearable. He spent the next hours at the shelter, sitting by Rex's kennel, speaking softly through the bars. Rex pressed close, his body trembling less with each passing visit. The bond was undeniable, yet fragile, as if both of them feared the world might tear it apart again. That evening, Daniel called an old contact from his unit, a fellow handler named Miller. His voice cracked with urgency as he explained, "Miller, listen, I found him, Rex. He's alive." There was silence on the line before Miller responded. "Dan, you sure about this? It's been years." "I'm sure," Daniel said fiercely, But the shelter won't release him without proof. Do you know if the army still keeps canine records, maybe microchip IDs? Miller sighed. They should. Every dog's got a file, but it won't be easy to get. You'll need to go through official channels. I don't care how long it takes. I'm not losing him again. Daniel hung up, his chest tight, but his resolve hardening. The battle wasn't with insurgents this time. It was with bureaucracy, paperwork, and ticking clocks, but the fight felt just as urgent. That night, as he sat on his porch staring at the quiet street, Daniel whispered to the empty air, "Hold on, boy. I'm coming for you." The cicadas buzzed, the summer night heavy and still. But inside him, the silence that had haunted him for years was breaking. He finally had a mission again, one that mattered more than anything else. What Daniel didn't know was how quickly that mission would be tested, and how close he was to losing Rex all over again. Daniel's frustration with the system grew heavier by the day, but he refused to give up. Each morning, he stopped at the shelter before work, kneeling by Rex's kennel. The shepherd's once fierce stare softened into recognition each time Daniel appeared, his body pressing against the bars as though trying to close the distance. Their bond was obvious to anyone who watched, but bureaucracy remained unmoved. Mary noticed the toll it was taking on him. One evening, as he sat at the diner counter pushing food around his plate, she placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You look like a man carrying a war on his own," she said. Daniel sighed. "I can't lose him again, Mary. Not because of paperwork." "Then don't fight alone," she replied simply. Her words lingered, and within days they began to take shape. Mary mentioned Rex's story to a group of regulars at the diner, many of them veterans themselves. Soon word spread through town about the soldier who had found his long-lost partner and the system that might keep them apart. Laura, the shelter director, noticed the change almost immediately. Volunteers offered extra shifts so Daniel could spend more time with Rex. A local lawyer, Tom Reynolds, stopped by the shelter after hearing the story. He shook Daniel's hand firmly. "Mary told me what you're up against," Tom said. "You need documentation, petitions, pressure. I can help with the legal side." Daniel, who had grown used to shouldering battles alone, hesitated. "Why would you do that?" "Because," Tom replied, "this town takes care of its own. And from the sound of it, that dog took care of you when no one else could." The words hit Daniel harder than he expected. Gratitude swelled in his chest, mingling with the ache of fear. For the first time he realized this wasn't just his fight anymore. Over the following week, the shelter staff bent the rules just enough to give Daniel extra time with Rex. They allowed him to walk the shepherd in the fenced yard under supervision. At first, Rex was cautious, his steps stiff, ears flicking nervously at every sound. But the moment Daniel gave a soft command, the old instincts flickered back. Sit, stay, heel. Each word pulled Rex closer to the dog he once was. One afternoon, as Daniel crouched in the grass, Rex pressed against him, head resting on his knee. Daniel's throat tightened and he whispered, "I'm here, boy. I'm not letting you go again." Laura, watching from the gate, wiped her eyes discreetly. Later, she admitted to Daniel, "You two, it's different. I can see it now. I'll do everything in my power to help you. But the law is the law." Daniel nodded. "Then we'll fight it the right way." The town rallied in small but powerful ways. A group of veterans visited the shelter, their presence steady and supportive. Local kids drew posters reading, "Let Rex go home." Even the mayor quietly called the county office, asking about ways to expedite the process. At night, Daniel still wrestled with fear, but now there was something new, hope strengthened by the people around him. For years he had felt like an outsider in his own town, a man standing behind invisible glass. Now, that glass was cracking. People weren't just watching, they were standing beside him. As summer heat pressed down on Pine Hills, Daniel found himself walking a new kind of battlefield, not one of gunfire and dust, but of paperwork, patience, and faith. And though the enemy was faceless bureaucracy, he wasn't fighting it alone. The battle wasn't over, but the tide had shifted. For a while it felt as though momentum was finally on Daniel's side. The community stood with him. Rex was responding more each day, and Tom, the lawyer, had begun filing inquiries with the county and even reaching out to the military's K9 registry. Daniel allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the worst was behind him. That illusion shattered one Friday afternoon when Laura called him into her office. Her tone was gentle but heavy. "Daniel, I need to tell you something before you hear it elsewhere." He braced himself, arms crossed tightly. "What is it?" She hesitated, then slid a folder across the desk. "A family put in an adoption request for Rex. They saw him on our site and filled the paperwork. They don't know the story you and I do, but legally they're within their rights." Daniel stared at the folder as if it were a weapon aimed at his chest. "You're telling me someone else could walk out of here with him?" Laura's eyes softened with regret. "If the mandatory hold period ends and your documentation isn't finalized, yes. I can delay the process as much as the law allows, but I can't block an application without cause, not without proof that he's yours." Daniel's pulse hammered. "You've seen him with me. You've seen how he responds. Isn't that proof enough?" "I wish it were," Laura said quietly, "but the county doesn't deal in wishes. They deal in paperwork." Anger and panic collided in Daniel's chest. He left the office and went straight to Rex's kennel. The shepherd rose at once, ears alert, tail giving a cautious wag. Daniel pressed his forehead against the bars, whispering, "They're trying to take you away from me. Not again. I won't let it happen." Rex whined softly, as if sensing the storm inside him. That night Daniel sat on his porch, phone pressed to his ear as he called Tom. "They've got someone lined up to adopt him. What do we do?" Tom's voice was calm but urgent. "We move faster. I'll escalate the military request, but we need more than that. Do you have anything with his service ID? Photos, logs, equipment?" "I've got some pictures, deployment notes, but the microchip scan is the only thing that'll make it official." "Then that's our target." "If we can prove the chip matches his old records, no one can contest it." Daniel leaned forward, gripping his knees. "And if the chip doesn't scan? Then we fight with every scrap of evidence you've got, but time is short. We can't afford delays." The conversation ended, but sleep never came. Daniel paced his living room until dawn, torn between rage at the system and fear of losing Rex again. He kept picturing a stranger's hand holding Rex's leash, walking him out the shelter door, erasing years of loyalty as though they had never existed. The next day at the shelter, Daniel avoided Laura's eyes. Instead, he focused on Rex, walking him around the yard under supervision. The dog healed perfectly, responding with precision that could not be coincidence. When Daniel gave the quiet command, "Watch," Rex's body tensed, scanning the perimeter like he had done countless times overseas. Volunteers paused to watch, murmuring in awe. One of the veterans in town clapped Daniel on the shoulder. "That's no stray. That's a soldier." The words fueled him, but the fear remained. The adoption request was real, and unless he proved Rex's identity beyond doubt, all their progress could vanish with a single signature. As the sun set behind the pines, Daniel whispered to Rex, "I'm not losing you. Not now, not ever. We'll fight this together." But deep down he knew the fight was only getting harder. The tension was unbearable. Every day felt like a countdown, the clock ticking toward the possibility of Rex being taken from him. Daniel knew he needed undeniable proof, something no one could dismiss as coincidence or sentiment. On Saturday morning, he drove to his storage unit on the edge of town. Dust hung in the air as he rolled up the door, revealing stacks of boxes filled with relics from his military years. Kneeling on the concrete floor, he opened them one by one. Faded uniforms, old boots, deployment journals, and training manuals. At the bottom of a weathered box, wrapped in a tattered cloth, he found what he was looking for, Rex's original service records. His hands shook as he flipped through the papers, eyes scanning line after line until he found the crucial detail, microchip ID 4729A, HN56. His chest tightened. It was the one thing that could silence every doubt. That afternoon he met Laura at the shelter, documents in hand. "I found his records," he said, voice urgent. "I know his chip number. We just need a vet to scan him." Laura looked at the papers, her brow furrowed but hopeful. If the chip matches, it'll end all arguments. But we need a certified scan. They called Dr. Patel, the town's veterinarian, who agreed to meet them after hours. Daniel rode in the truck with Rex in a secure kennel, his hands gripping the sides as if the world might snatch the dog away before they arrived. At the clinic, Dr. Patel wheeled over the scanner. Rex stood rigid, eyes flicking nervously, but Daniel knelt beside him, steadying him with a firm hand on his shoulder. "Easy, boy." "I'm right here." The scanner beeped as it passed over Rex's neck. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then the device displayed a number, 4729A HN56. Daniel's knees nearly buckled. His eyes blurred with tears as he whispered, "It's him. It's really him." Rex pressed closer, tail wagging faintly as if sensing Daniel's relief. Dr. Patel gave a small smile. "This is definitive. No one can dispute it now. He's your dog, Daniel." Laura exhaled, visibly moved. "I'll submit the paperwork first thing tomorrow. The adoption request won't stand against military records. He's yours again." Daniel buried his face briefly against Rex's neck, breathing in the musky scent of his fur, a smell that pulled him back through years of dust, fear, and loyalty. His voice cracked as he murmured, "I thought I lost you forever, but we found our way back." The drive back to the shelter was quiet, but the silence felt different. No longer oppressive, now it was full of possibility. Daniel glanced at Rex through the grate of the kennel, watching the shepherd's steady gaze. It wasn't just about proving ownership. It was about proving their story, proving that bonds forged in fire could survive even the darkest separations. That night, Daniel sat on his porch, service papers spread across his lap. He traced the faded ink of Rex's name, his fingers lingering over each word. For years that name had been a memory carved into his heart. Now it was real again, living, breathing, standing just a few miles away. The battle wasn't over. The final authorization from the military still had to come. But the weight pressing on him had shifted. He wasn't fighting shadows anymore. He had proof, hard and undeniable. And soon, no one could stand between him and the dog who had saved his life more times than he could count. For the first time in years, Daniel slept soundly, the storm inside him quieting at last. The wait for official confirmation stretched into weeks, each day dragging as Daniel checked his phone obsessively. Every call from an unknown number set his pulse racing, only to end in disappointment when it was nothing related. Still, the proof from the microchip gave him a fragile kind of hope, one he clung to with every ounce of strength. One humid morning, as he hammered nails into a fence at the shelter, his phone buzzed. Laura's voice came through, tight with urgency. "Daniel, I just got word from the registry office. Can you come to my office right now?" His stomach clenched. "Is it about Rex?" "Yes, come." The drive blurred. By the time he stormed into Laura's office, sweat soaked his shirt and his heart thundered in his ears. Laura held a stack of papers, her expression unreadable. "Sit down," she said softly. He didn't sit. "Tell me." She slid the top page toward him. The Department of Defense confirmed it. The microchip matches the official records. Rex is recognized as a retired military K9. He's officially yours, Daniel. The words hit him like sunlight breaking through years of cloud. For a moment he couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His hands trembled as he picked up the paper, staring at the confirmation as though it might dissolve. Laura smiled faintly, her own eyes glistening. "Congratulations. He's coming home with you." Daniel pressed his hand to his mouth, emotion crashing over him. I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to," she said gently. "Just go get your boy." They walked together to the kennels. The moment Rex saw Daniel, he leapt up, tail beating hard against the steel bars. For the first time, there was no hesitation, no guarded watchfulness, just joy. Laura unlocked the gate. "He's yours now. Take him home." Daniel knelt, arms open. Rex barreled into him, pressing his weight against Daniel's chest. His fur was coarse under Daniel's fingers, his breath hot, his body trembling with excitement. Daniel buried his face in the dog's neck, tears soaking into his coat. "We made it, boy. You're coming home." The shelter staff gathered quietly nearby, some clapping, others wiping their eyes. Even the volunteers who had doubted at first were now smiling, moved by the undeniable reunion. Word spread quickly through Pine Hills. By evening, the diner was buzzing with locals who had heard the news. Mary hugged Daniel tightly when he stopped by with Rex at his side. "I told you not to give up," she said, stroking Rex's head, "and look at you two now." Rex stood proudly beside Daniel, his scars visible but no longer defining him. People reached out to pet him, and though he remained cautious, his trust in Daniel anchored him. Later that night, as Daniel sat on his porch with Rex lying at his feet, the cicadas humming in the warm air, he finally let himself exhale. For years, silence had been his enemy. Tonight it felt different, complete, whole. He stroked Rex's ears, speaking softly. "We're home. Both of us." The battle had been long and painful, but the victory was undeniable. Daniel hadn't just reclaimed his partner, he had reclaimed a piece of himself, and though he knew challenges still lay ahead, for the first time in years, he believed they could face them together. The first night with Rex back in his home felt surreal. Daniel spread a blanket on the living room floor, unwilling to let his partner sleep in another kennel. Rex circled twice before lying down beside him, head resting across Daniel's arm as if no time had passed at all. The steady rhythm of the dog's breathing lulled Daniel into the deepest sleep he'd had in years. In the mornings, they walked together down the quiet streets of Pine Hills. Neighbors waved from porches, their smiles wide at the sight of the soldier and his scarred shepherd side by side. Kids pedaled by on bikes, pointing and whispering with excitement. For the first time since returning home, Daniel felt like he belonged, not as an outsider haunted by silence, but as a man living again. Rex's scars drew attention, but Daniel never hid them. "Every mark tells a story," he explained one afternoon when a curious boy asked, "and stories make us stronger." The boy nodded solemnly, patting Rex's head before running off. Mary often joined them at the diner patio, setting a bowl of water at Rex's feet. "He looks good," she observed, watching Rex settle calmly by Daniel's chair. "But so do you." "Haven't seen that light in your eyes in a long time." Daniel smiled faintly, scratching Rex behind the ears. "He gave me back something I didn't even know I'd lost." Healing wasn't instant. Nightmares still came, though less often now. When they did, Rex was there, pressing close, grounding him in the present. Therapy sessions at the VA, which Daniel had resisted for years, began to feel less like a burden and more like an extension of the healing he had already begun with Rex by his side. Laura invited Daniel and Rex to speak at a local school about service dogs. Standing before a classroom of wide-eyed children, Daniel felt nerves he hadn't expected. But as Rex lay calmly at his feet, he found his voice. "These dogs aren't just trained partners," he told the kids. "They're family. They put their lives on the line for us, and they teach us what loyalty really means." Afterward, the children crowded around, asking questions, petting Rex gently. One girl whispered, "He's a hero." Daniel's throat tightened, but he nodded. "Yes, he is." The shelter also asked Daniel to help with other difficult dogs, ones that flinched at touch or growled at strangers. With Rex nearby, those dogs began to trust more quickly. Daniel realized he and Rex had a gift to offer: patience, calm, and proof that brokenness didn't mean hopelessness. At home, life fell into a rhythm. Morning walks, afternoons at the shelter, evenings on the porch with the cicadas humming around them. Rex would sprawl at his feet while Daniel read or wrote in his journal. The silence that once suffocated him now felt full, no longer empty, but alive with presence. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the pines, Daniel leaned back in his chair, looking at Rex stretched out on the porch boards. "You know," he murmured, "I thought I came back from war broken beyond repair, but you pulled me out of the rubble all over again." Rex lifted his head at the sound of his voice, ears flicking before resting once more. The weight Daniel had carried for years hadn't vanished, but it had shifted. With Rex beside him, it no longer crushed him. Instead, it became something he could carry. because he wasn't carrying it alone. And deep down, Daniel knew their story wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about rebuilding, together. Autumn crept into Pine Hills with crisp mornings and the scent of wood smoke drifting from chimneys. Daniel walked the familiar streets with Rex at his side, the shepherd's pace steady, his scars no longer the first thing people noticed. Children called his name when they saw him, and neighbors stopped to chat, offering biscuits or a scratch behind the ears. For years, Daniel had felt like an invisible man. Now with Rex, he was part of the fabric of the town again. One evening, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with a notebook open in front of him. He had started journaling as part of his therapy, but the words had grown into something more. Page after page, he wrote about Rex, their missions overseas, the fear, the loyalty, the moments of unspoken trust. Tonight, though, he wasn't writing about the past. He was writing about the present. "Second chances," he murmured aloud, his pen scratching across the page. "Not everyone gets them, but when they come, you hold on with everything you've got." Rex stirred on the rug nearby, lifting his head as if listening. Daniel chuckled softly. "You've always known when I'm talking about you, haven't you?" He closed the notebook and leaned back, letting the quiet of the house settle around him. For the first time in years, it wasn't an oppressive silence, it was peace. A few days later, Daniel and Rex visited the shelter, not as broken souls searching for answers, but as partners ready to help others. Laura greeted them warmly. "We've got a new batch of tough cases," she said. "Think you two can work your magic?" Daniel smiled, glancing at Rex, who sat tall and alert beside him. "We'll do our best." Together they spent the afternoon walking the kennels, offering calm presence to dogs who had forgotten what trust felt like. Rex, with his scars and his quiet strength, became living proof that healing was possible. And Daniel realized that helping others heal was part of his own recovery. That night, back on the porch, Mary stopped by with a pie in her hands. She set it down on the railing and shook her head with a grin. "You know, when I first told you about the shelter, I didn't think it would lead to all this, but I've never been so glad to be right." Daniel laughed, a genuine laugh that felt strange and wonderful in his chest. "You saved me as much as he did. If you hadn't pushed, I'd still be sitting in the dark." Mary smiled warmly, her eyes shining. "No, Daniel, you just needed a little nudge. The rest, you did yourself." As she walked away, Daniel looked down at Rex, lying contentedly at his feet, the golden glow of the porch light reflecting in the shepherd's eyes. He stroked his partner's head, his voice soft but steady. "We made it, boy. We found our way home." For Daniel, the war would never completely vanish. The scars, like Rex's, would always be there. But now they weren't marks of loss. They were reminders of survival, of loyalty, of love that endured beyond impossible odds. If you followed this journey, you know what it means when silence turns into peace, when a man and his dog find each other again after years of separation. Stories like this remind us of the power of resilience, of loyalty that refuses to die. So before you go, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories that lift the heart and remind us what truly matters. And if you want to keep walking with us, click on the video suggested on your screen. The next story is waiting for you there.